Martha Lewis adjusted the hem of a dress under the dim light of her modest apartment. As a seamstress, every stitch mattered, not just for her work, but for survival. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from worry. Across the room, her 7-year-old son Leo lay curled under a thin quilt on their worn-out sofa, his pale face barely visible against the fraying fabric. "Mom?" Leo's weak voice broke the silence. Martha immediately stopped what she was doing and crossed the room to him. "Yes, sweetheart?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Her voice was gentle, masking the fear that tightened her chest. "Is it still raining?" he whispered, his words labored, each one a small battle. Martha glanced toward the window. The rain hadn't stopped all day, its relentless rhythm a reflection of the turmoil in her heart. "It's just a little rain," she said, forcing a smile. "Maybe when it clears, we can go look for a rainbow." Leo managed a faint smile, his eyelids fluttering shut as if he were conjuring the image. But Martha couldn't ignore how frail he looked, how shallow his breaths had become. She pressed her hand gently to his forehead, feeling the heat of his fever. Her heart sank further. The night dragged on, each moment filled with the rhythmic drip of rain and Leo's labored breathing. Then, without warning, his tiny body was seized by a violent coughing fit. Martha sprang into action, holding him upright, urging him to breathe. When the fit subsided, Leo slumped against her, his strength spent. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You don't have to be," Martha whispered, her tears blending with the rain that streaked the window. But when Leo's breathing grew dangerously shallow, Martha knew she couldn't wait any longer. Wrapping him in an old coat, she bolted out into the storm, her feet splashing through puddles as she ran toward the hospital. The fluorescent lights of the hospital were harsh against the darkness outside as Martha burst through the doors, shouting for help. Nurses rushed to take Leo from her arms, their movements swift and practiced. She tried to follow, but someone gently stopped her, guiding her to a chair in the waiting room. She sat there, soaked and trembling, her hands clutching the damp coat. Minutes stretched into hours, until a doctor emerged, his expression somber. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could." Martha's world crumbled. She didn't hear the rest of his words. Her hands went limp, her breath catching in her throat as reality crashed over her. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and despair. The hospital bills piled up, each one a reminder of her helplessness. Unable to pay, Martha was forced to sell what little she had left. Her apartment, her sewing machine, even the quilt she had stitched by hand for Leo. All gone. In the end, all she kept was a small stuffed elephant, Leo's favorite toy, its once bright colors now faded. Clutching it tightly, she wandered the streets, her feet moving aimlessly as the rain continued to fall. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body and spirit broken under the weight of loss and hopelessness. She had no home, no family, and no direction. The only thing she had left was a flicker of memory, the sound of Leo's laughter, the way he would hold the stuffed elephant during his hardest days. Martha's steps grew heavier, her body trembling from exhaustion and the biting cold. The rain blurred her vision, but ahead she saw a faint glow, a gate illuminated by warm lights beyond it. She staggered closer, her strength waning, until she collapsed near the wrought iron gate. The stuffed elephant fell from her grasp as she crumpled to the ground, the world fading into darkness. Inside the mansion, Andrew Carter was seated in his study, his pen hovering over a blank notebook. Words refused to come, as they often did these days. The storm outside matched his mood, restless, unrelenting, and heavy with unspoken tension. Raindrops streaked the glass, their rhythmic drumming a cruel reminder of the night that had changed his life forever. The night he lost Lily, the woman he loved more than anything. He turned to the window, hoping for some inspiration, but what he saw instead made him freeze. A figure lay slumped near the gate, barely visible through the downpour. At first, He thought it might be debris from the storm, but a closer look revealed the unmistakable shape of a person. Without hesitation, Andrew grabbed his coat and stepped into the storm, the cold rain drenching him instantly. When he reached the gate, he found a woman curled on the ground, her clothes soaked and her hair plastered to her pale face. In her limp hand, she clutched a small stuffed elephant, its faded fabric telling a story of love and loss. "Miss?" Andrew called, his voice steady but urgent. The woman groaned faintly but didn't respond. Andrew hesitated, weighing his options. Bringing a stranger into his home was risky, but leaving her here in this storm wasn't an option he could live with. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was frighteningly light, her body limp as if the weight of the world had finally crushed her. The warmth of the mansion enveloped them as Andrew carried the woman inside, laying her gently on the leather couch in his study. Her soaked clothes left dark stains on the cushions, but Andrew paid them no mind. "Teresa?" he called, his voice echoing through the spacious hall. Moments later, his housekeeper appeared, her eyes widening at the sight of the unconscious woman. "Mr. Carter, who is this?" "I don't know," Andrew admitted, shrugging off his wet coat. "I found her collapsed near the gate. She needs help." Teresa nodded without question. Years of service had taught her to act first and ask later. She fetched towels and a blanket, and together they dried the woman as best they could and wrapped her in warmth. As Teresa worked, Andrew noticed the stuffed elephant still clutched in the woman's hand. He gently pried it loose, setting it on the coffee table beside a photograph that had fallen from her coat pocket. The image was of a young boy, his smile bright despite the thinness of his face. Andrew felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, compassion perhaps, or a sense of familiarity with the pain etched into the small memento. "She looks exhausted," Teresa murmured, smoothing the blanket over the woman. "But I think she just needs rest." Andrew nodded. "We'll see how she's doing in the morning." Martha stirred hours later, her eyelids fluttering open to an unfamiliar room bathed in the warm glow of a fire. Panic surged through her as she bolted upright, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her gaze darted around the room until it landed on a man seated in an armchair across from her. "Where am I?" she croaked, her voice hoarse and trembling. "You're safe," the man replied, raising a hand in a calming gesture. "You were outside my gate during the storm. I brought you here." Martha's hands gripped the blanket tightly as suspicion flickered in her eyes. "Why?" Andrew leaned back, his expression calm but unreadable. "Because leaving you out there wasn't an option." Martha studied him, searching for any hint of pity or malice, but found only quiet sincerity. Her shoulders sagged slightly, though her grip on the blanket remained firm. "I didn't mean to end up here," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "You don't have to explain," Andrew said softly. "Just rest. You've been through enough." Before Martha could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Daddy?" She turned to see a little girl standing in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her dark curls framed bright, curious eyes that lit up when she saw Andrew. Andrew's expression softened. "Emily, come here." The girl hesitated, her gaze darting to Martha. "Is she the lady from outside?" "Yes," Andrew said with a nod. "She'll be staying with us for a little while. Emily, this is..." "Martha," she said quickly, her voice still guarded. "This is Martha," Andrew continued, "and this is my daughter Emily." Emily offered a shy smile. "Hi, Martha. This is Mr. Buttons." She held up the rabbit as if introducing an old friend. Despite herself, Martha felt a faint smile tug at her lips. "Hi, Mr. Buttons," she replied softly. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Martha felt a small flicker of warmth, a fragile reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness could find its way through. Little did she know this encounter would change her life forever. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the mansion's dining room, casting a soft glow over the polished wooden table. Martha sat awkwardly at one end, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. She still felt out of place in the opulent surroundings, the warmth of the fire and the aroma of freshly baked bread clashing with the cold, empty ache in her chest. Across from her, Emily swung her legs beneath the chair, her small hands clutching Mr. Buttons tightly. The girl had a brightness about her that reminded Martha painfully of Leo. "Do you like your tea?" Emily asked, her voice cheerful yet tentative. Martha nodded, offering a faint smile. "It's lovely, thank you." Emily grinned and turned to Andrew, who entered the room with a tray of pastries. He placed them on the table and sat down, his gaze briefly lingering on Martha. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. Martha hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Better," she said finally. "Thank you for everything." Andrew waved off her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. Martha looked down, unsure how to respond. She didn't believe that, not after everything she'd been through. Over the next few days, Martha began to recover physically, though the weight of her grief remained. Emily, with her boundless curiosity, often drew her into conversations. The little girl's questions were innocent, but probing, slowly unraveling Martha's guarded demeanor. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Emily coughed lightly, a small, dry sound that made Martha freeze. "Are you okay?" Martha asked quickly, her voice tinged with concern. Emily nodded, brushing it off. "Just a little cough. Daddy says it's nothing." But Martha couldn't shake the unease that crept into her chest. She recognized the signs, the slight wheeze in Emily's breath, the faint flush on her cheeks. Memories of Leo flooded back unbidden, and her stomach twisted. Later that evening, Martha found Andrew in his study, seated before the crackling fire. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure if she should intrude. "You don't have to stay in there," Andrew said without looking up. "Come in." Martha stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I wanted to talk to you about Emily." Andrew set down his pen and turned to her, his expression shifting to one of mild concern. "What about her?" "She mentioned her cough earlier," Martha began carefully, "and I've noticed a few things. The way she breathes, the color in her cheeks. I don't mean to alarm you, but it could be something serious." Andrew's brows furrowed. "Her doctor said it was just a mild cold, nothing to worry about." Martha shook her head. "I've seen this before. My son Leo..." Her voice caught, but she pushed through. "He started with similar symptoms, and I didn't act fast enough. Please, Andrew, have her checked by a specialist." The mention of Leo made Andrew pause. He studied Martha's face, the pain etched into every line. Finally, he nodded. "I'll make an appointment first thing in the morning." That night, as the house settled into quiet, Martha sat in the guest room, staring out the window. The rain had returned, its soft patter against the glass mirroring her restless thoughts. She clutched the stuffed elephant she had kept from Leo, her thumb tracing the worn fabric. Images of him filled her mind, the way he'd smiled despite his illness, the way he'd clutched the elephant during his worst days. "I'm not going to let it happen again," she whispered, her resolve hardening. The following day, Martha accompanied Andrew and Emily to the specialist. The waiting room was eerily quiet, the ticking clock amplifying the tension in the air. Martha sat beside Emily, holding her hand as they waited for the results. When the doctor returned, his expression was grave. "Emily's condition is more serious than we initially thought. She has a rare illness that's putting strain on her lungs and other organs. We'll need to start treatment immediately, but she may require a transplant." Andrew's face paled. "A transplant? How soon?" The doctor shook his head. "It's hard to say. Finding a donor can take time." Martha's chest tightened as she glanced at Emily, who was sitting quietly, clutching Mr. Buttons. The girl's innocent smile was a painful reminder of Leo's courage in the face of his illness. Without hesitation, Martha spoke up. "Test me. See if I'm a match." Andrew turned to her, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Martha, you don't have to." "I do," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I couldn't save my son Andrew. If there's even a chance I can help Emily, I have to try. The tests were done that afternoon. Andrew paced the length of the hallway as they waited for the results, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiles. Martha sat quietly near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her thoughts drifting to Leo. When the doctor finally returned, his words were both shocking and profound. "Martha," he said, handing her the results, "you're a match. A near-perfect one. Statistically, it's incredibly rare." Andrew took the papers from the doctor, his eyes scanning the details. Something about the results tugged at a memory, a confession his father had made years ago. The pieces of the puzzle began to align, but Andrew kept his thoughts to himself. For now, the focus was on Emily. The air in the specialist's office felt heavy, laden with the weight of what lay ahead. Emily sat on a small bench beside Martha, unaware of the gravity of the conversation happening around her. She clutched Mr. Buttons tightly, her pale face lighting up every so often when she caught Martha's reassuring smile. Martha folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "What's the next step, doctor?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, his expression calm but serious. "We'll need to schedule the procedure as soon as possible. Timing is critical, and with Martha being a compatible donor, the odds are favorable. However, this isn't without risks for both Emily and Martha." Andrew sat stiffly, his jaw tight. He had always been a man of control, but the thought of putting Martha through a dangerous procedure filled him with unease. "And if something goes wrong?" he asked, his voice strained. The doctor met his gaze. "We'll take every precaution, but surgery always carries risks." Andrew turned to Martha, his expression a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "You've already done so much. You don't have to do this." Martha shook her head firmly. "I do. Emily deserves a chance to grow up, to live the life Leo couldn't. I won't stand by and do nothing." Preparations for the surgery moved quickly. Back at the mansion, Martha found herself spending as much time as she could with Emily, savoring the little moments, her laughter, her curiosity, the way she clung to Mr. Buttons. One evening, Emily tugged on Martha's sleeve. "Will it hurt?" she asked softly, her wide eyes filled with innocence. Martha knelt down, brushing a curl from Emily's face. "It might hurt a little at first, but then you'll feel so much better, and I'll be right here with you the whole time." Emily smiled faintly and hugged Mr. Buttons tighter. "Thank you, Martha. Daddy says you're really brave." Martha's throat tightened, but she smiled back. "You're the brave one, Emily." Andrew watched the interactions from a distance, his thoughts churning. He had always admired Martha's resilience, but her willingness to risk everything for Emily stirred something deeper. The results from the compatibility test still weighed heavily on him, the numbers pointing to a truth he couldn't ignore. Late one night, he stood in his study, staring at the DNA results. The near-perfect match wasn't just a coincidence. It was confirmation of a possibility that had lingered in his mind ever since he learned about Martha's past. His father's confession echoed in his thoughts. "There's a child out there, Andrew, one I never had the courage to claim." Could Martha be that child? Andrew hesitated, torn between the need for answers and the risk of disrupting everything. With a deep breath, he set the results aside. For now, Emily's health was the priority. The morning of the surgery arrived quickly. The hospital was a flurry of activity as doctors and nurses prepared both Martha and Emily. Andrew stood in the hallway, watching as Martha was wheeled toward the operating room. She caught his gaze and gave him a faint smile. "Take care of her while I'm under." Andrew nodded, his throat tight. "I will. And thank you, Martha, for everything." Martha's smile softened, but her voice was resolute. "Just make sure she gets better." Hours passed in agonizing silence. Andrew sat in the waiting room, his hands clenched together as he stared at the floor. The hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of a passing monitor filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere. Finally, a nurse approached him. "Mr. Carter, the surgery is proceeding as planned. Both Emily and Martha are stable." Relief surged through him, but it was short-lived. He couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at him, the knowledge he hadn't shared with Martha, the possibility that she was more than just Emily's donor. Inside the operating rooms, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Emily's small body lay motionless under the bright lights, her vitals steady as the surgeons worked with precision. In the adjacent room, Martha's surgery was progressing as well, though her body showed signs of strain. "BP is dropping," one of the nurses announced. "Stabilize her," the lead surgeon ordered. "We're almost finished." After what felt like an eternity, the procedures were completed. Emily's new tissue was successfully grafted, and Martha's condition, though fragile, had stabilized. When the doctor approached Andrew later, his expression was a mix of relief and caution. "The surgery was a success," he said. "Emily is already showing signs of improvement, but Martha, she's in a coma. Her body needs time to recover, and we'll monitor her closely." Andrew exhaled sharply, his emotions crashing over him in waves. Gratitude for Emily's survival, fear for Martha's recovery, and the unspoken truth he could no longer ignore. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Emily lay peacefully in her bed, her color already improving. Andrew sat beside her, his hand gently resting over hers. He had spent every moment since the surgery by her side, unable to tear himself away. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was faint but steady, her eyelids fluttering open. Andrew leaned closer, his heart leaping at the sound. "Emily, sweetheart, you're awake." She smiled weakly, her fingers curling around his hand. "Is Martha okay?" Andrew hesitated, unsure how to explain. "She's resting," he said finally. "She's very tired, but she'll be okay. She did something very brave for you." Emily's small face lit up with a mix of admiration and wonder. "She's like my hero," she murmured, her voice trailing off as sleep claimed her again. Down the hall, Martha lay motionless in her bed, her face pale but peaceful. Andrew stood at the doorway, the DNA results clutched in his trembling hand. He had reread them so many times he could recite every word, every percentage. The truth was undeniable. Martha wasn't just Emily's savior. She was his sister. Taking a deep breath, Andrew stepped into the room. He pulled a chair beside Martha's bed and sat down, the weight of the revelation pressing heavily on him. "Martha," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've already given us so much, but there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you before." He hesitated, his gaze dropping to her still hand resting on the blanket. "You're my sister, Martha. I don't know how this happened or why our father kept it from us, but you're not alone anymore. You have a family." It was 2 days later when Martha finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the blurry world around her began to take shape. Andrew was at her side immediately, his expression a mixture of relief and joy. "Martha," he said, leaning forward, "you're awake. How do you feel?" She blinked at him, her voice hoarse. "Emily, is she okay?" "She's fine," Andrew assured her, his voice warm. "The surgery was a success. She's already getting stronger." Martha exhaled a soft sigh of relief, her body sinking back into the pillows. "Thank God," she murmured. Andrew hesitated before speaking again. "Martha, there's something I need to tell you. It's about the compatibility test. And about us." Her brow furrowed in confusion as she turned her gaze to him. "What do you mean?" Andrew reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded DNA results. He handed them to her with trembling hands. "You're my sister," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Our father, he had another family, a secret he kept from me. I didn't know until now, but the results confirmed it. You're not alone anymore, Martha. You have me, and you have Emily." Martha stared at the paper, her fingers trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as the words sank in. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Andrew replied gently, taking her hand. "Just know that you're part of our family now. You always will be." Later that day, Emily was wheeled into Martha's room, her small face lighting up when she saw her. "Martha!" she cried, her voice filled with joy. Martha's tears spilled freely as she reached for the little girl, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and love. Emily climbed onto the bed carefully, wrapping her arms around Martha. "Daddy said you're my aunt," Emily said, her smile wide. "That means we're family." "Yes, sweetheart," Martha said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're family." Andrew watched the two of them, his heart full for the first time in years. They had endured so much pain and loss, but together they had found something beautiful, a new beginning. Months later, life at the Carter estate had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Emily, now full of energy and health, ran through the garden chasing butterflies, her laughter filling the air. Martha watched from the porch, a soft smile on her face as she sipped tea. Andrew joined her, carrying a plate of freshly baked cookies. "She's like a completely different child," he said, his gaze following Emily. "She's thriving," Martha replied, her voice warm, "and I feel like I've found my place again." Andrew nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've brought more to this family than I can ever repay. You've shown me what it means to be connected, to care for someone without hesitation." Martha looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same gratitude. "You gave me a chance to heal, Andrew, to find joy after so much loss. I'll always be thankful for that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily ran to them, breathless but beaming. "Come on, let's watch the sunset together," she exclaimed. Hand in hand, the three of them walked toward the hill overlooking the estate. The golden light bathed them in warmth, and for the first time in years, Martha felt truly at peace. She had found not only a new family, but also a new beginning, one filled with love, hope, and the quiet beauty of life moving forward.